My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm here with the OSU, Oklahoma State University Library project called Oral Histories, O-State Stories. And we're with Bob Jackman. And he was a graduate of OSU in 1957. Okay. Can you bring us up to date a little bit, how you came to be at OSU?
Well, I went 1 year at junior college at Northeastern Oklahoma A&M Junior College at Miami, Oklahoma in '53, and then the year of '53 to '54. And then I went to Oklahoma A&M from '54 and graduated there in their first graduating class, where they changed their name. First graduating class was in the summer of '57. So one of my claims of fame is to tell people that I was in the first graduating class of OSU, which happened in the summer of '57. I majored in and graduated with a bachelor's degree in geology. And I also went one year to summer school at A&M or OSU, and that was in the summer of '57. And then I completed, we had to go to a geological summer camp. I did that, I went to summer school in '56, and then I went to geological camp with about 30 or 40 graduate students, or students from OU and OSU. We had a joint camp at Canyon City, Colorado, and I went to school there for one month. Actually, it was a geological summer camp. So that's how I got to, and that's my brief background on the days, numbers, and so forth.
Did they call you a transfer student at that point, or just?
No, there were a lot of people that came in from, so I guess maybe technically I may have been a transfer student, but basically there were a lot of people that would come in after 1 or 2 semesters from junior colleges or so forth, and there wasn't any real designation that I recall.
Did you have any opinion with the name change?
Oh, there was, yes, there was some, my personal thoughts were, there was a sweep across the entire United States and especially in Oklahoma, is to name everything a university. And of course, the agriculture and mechanical schools, got, more or less eliminated, and everything became a university, whereas there were a lot of us that said, oh, let's leave the designations. But it was, at that point in my life, I was glad to get the degree and very happy to have the opportunity to go to school there. So it wasn't that controversial with me.
What were some of the things you remember doing for your pastime, fun time?
Ping pong. This was, you got to realize, this is in the days before television. We did not have TV. We had, my senior year, '57, they had TVs in some of the dorms, but there were no TVs in residences per se, maybe a few, but so TV was not one of the things that we did. Now you're leading up to my famous part-time activity that I did my senior year for maybe a semester and a half. And I lived in North Murray. That was a boys' dorm then. Is it currently?
They're getting ready to renovate it and make it offices.
Okay, well it had been a girls' dorm. North Murray, and but they changed it over, and so my senior year, prior to that, I had lived off campus, which is, I'll have some stories about that, but my senior year, and you got to realize this is in the days when Oklahoma was still dry. We did not have liquor stores. And Stillwater was a very dry town. There were 3 or 4 bars, beer joints, and some of them were fairly nice. They were not really bad places, but and there were no liquor stores in Stillwater or that county. Well, there weren't any liquor stores in the entire state. Okay, so I was a bootlegger. part-time, wasn't a high volume, but I lived, my hometown was Miami, Oklahoma, so 2 or 3 times or more during the semester, I would be going home, and I'd take 2 suitcases, and one of them I'd go over to Seneca, Missouri, where they had liquor stores, and I'd fill it up with whiskey and vodka. And the other suitcase would be my clothes and books and so forth. My parents never knew of this. Very few people knew of this. And so then I'd go back and I would sell the whiskey. And those were the days when, believe me, and we were all in the same boat. You didn't have spending money. It was, you know, and we weren't conscious of it, but you know, extra money was hard to get. And so, and then, like, for instance, every summer you had to go get a good summer job, period. So I bootlegged out of the dorm, and it was well known. It wasn't that big of a deal, and there weren't that many of us on-campus bootleggers. So I got by on the novelty of it, and obviously I kept a low profile, and we had lots of veterans on the campus because we had gone through Korea. I was between Korea and Vietnam, and we still were getting World War II veterans there. So there were some older gentlemen, veterans, and etc. So if I recall, I had all, you know, 4 or 5 or 6 customers, and the dorm proctor on my floor, he knew what I was doing, and you know, as long as you know, keep it quiet. Matter of fact, if I recall, he was a veteran also. So that was my claim of fame. Was I was a bootlegger out of North Murray, and I had one incident where a guy came up who had been drinking and who was partially intoxicated, and that happened, and I said, I'm not going to do this anymore. It just, you know, it ceased to be fun, and so I quit it. But anyway, and incidentally, the way we got to school was back in those days, not everyone had cars, or cars are fairly rare. And if you had 1 or 2 from your hometown who had a car, suddenly you were good friends with them, so that's how you got back and forth. But it was quite common for us to hitchhike. Hitchhiking was fairly common in those days, and it was not the dangerous hitchhiking like it is now. And so on weekends, you would see on the major highways going out of Stillwater, you would see students hitchhiking home. It was fairly common, and I would hitchhike all the way from Stillwater to Miami, and vice versa, hitchhike back occasionally. I had friends that had vehicles, but if I needed to make a whiskey run and couldn't find one, well, I'd hitchhike up, and everybody would think, well, there's a college student, so I'd never tell them what I had in the other suitcase. So I got a lot of mileage out of that. But I'm going to just cover it. You asked me about some other activities, and then I'll just talk about, I made myself some notes here about, we occasionally had poker games, which, you know, I'm sure students still do. And again, we didn't have TV, and a lot of us never had radios even. I mean, it was like... we were lucky to go to school, and we studied and we worked and etc. So I'm not going to say we were a bunch of monks, but we didn't have the other, you know, luxuries that we have today. We played poker, not that often, but there was always, invariably, there was poker games going on during times of finals. And you would see these guys, and I was talking to my brother about this, that some guy that had really made failing grades or close to failing grades, and then it got to time for finals, and here'd be a poker game. Suddenly he just stays in the game, you know, and he'd cut finals, you know. So we had that. But these were small, there was no serious money involved in them. Some other aspects was that this again in when I was there from 54 to 57, this was the Cold War era. It was the pre-pill era, okay? And and it was, we would have occasional couple of students, and the key words were, we just decided to elope, okay? And then invariably, the next thing you'd know was that they had a very healthy 8-9 pound premature baby. Part of the pre-pill era. There was an incident, incidentally, back to the alcohol aspect, there was not the drinking on the campuses that someone might pick up by this bootlegging story. Matter of fact, I was trying to recall, I don't think I ever went to a real big beer bust or a big drinking party on campus or near campus. It just wasn't tolerated. What a lot of us would do, maybe once a semester or so forth, would drive to Oklahoma City. That was the place to go for a party. Now, the downside of that was, we're talking about pre-seatbelt days, okay? And if you'd look at the traffic mortality rates, they were very, very bad. I was, when I was making my notes, I remembered 2 instances where, one where 5 guys were killed coming back from partying over to Oklahoma City. We didn't have seat belts, and safety wasn't what it is today on driving. So there wasn't, it was, I'm sure in the fraternities, I was not in the fraternity house. I know that there was a lot more partying going on, but for us, a lot of, and I can't say what the graduation rates were either, but I was in a hard major, geology, and at that time, and so we just, we were there to study, and we played ping pong, occasional poker game, and movies. That was once a week. Boy, if there was a good movie on, that was the outlet, is go to the movie. And so that was one of our outlets. And then during basketball season or wrestling season, those were more dominant than football. You got to realize that. Incidentally, on football, my brother was going to school there, and all things, he invited me up that weekend, and I went, and this was in October of '51, and I made a note here to make sure I'm right on that date. Yeah, October '51, the famous Johnny Bright incident. Have you all heard of this? You haven't? Oh gosh, the Johnny Bright, B-R-I-G-H-T incident. Johnny Bright was a black football player playing for Drake. And he played it, and I went to the game in 1951 where Wilbanks Smith was instructed by the coach to go up and hit him illegally and broke his jaw. And it made national news, and the newspaper reporters from the Des Moines, Des Moines, Iowa, got photos of Johnny Bright going up and hitting Wilbanks Smith after the play had already left him. And of all things, I was sitting in the temporary bleachers at the end zone, and I was just looking right down, and I was young, and I was watching Johnny Bright because he was such a fantastic black football player. Oh, it's amazing, man. And this guy came up and hit him from the side and broke his jaw, and it made national news, and it's a major incident. And so I happened to see that. He was the first black player to play at OSU or A&M. And matter of fact, it was not until last year that Dr. Schmidley officially apologized to Drake University over that incident. It was a terrible thing to happen. It caused Drake to drop out of the football conference at that time. It caused enormous repercussions. It was not indicative of the attitude towards racism or color or anything on the campus. We just happened to have I called him thug football coach from the South, and it was a shame that happened because there were so many other things positive for racial integration and understanding of all races, creeds, colors, and ethnicities going on at the campus. That OSU or A&M got a bad name for a long time over that incident. I happened to see that incident. I'm looking at my notes, and again, this was Cold War, and this was in the mid to late 50s. The fluence had not hit the U.S. That didn't really come on until the 60s. So it was, we were lucky to be there, going to college. I knew it, and so there was a focus on academics and a focus on learning. And so we didn't have a lot of polarizing, off-campus or outside of classroom activities going on the campus or nationally. We didn't have those things that are divisive now, like pro-choice or anti-abortion or National Rifle Association or prayer in school or the big tribalism now of yay OSU and yay A&M, the football, or yay OU. And I don't mean they're divisive, but we just didn't have those. It was more a little bit quieter and a more focused. Religion was not that important. It was it was there. The Baptist Student Union was there. Those components were there, but it was not emphasized. It was not as important, and no one discussed what's your religion. No one discussed your points of view on that. And I took geology, and we went through, in paleontology and so forth, we got into, I never will forget it, the first time I ever heard it was the professor said something about some people have problems with how we age the earth and so forth, and he just said that's their prerogative. And I had to go up and ask him. Because later, what was he talking about the Bible and et cetera? And he said, yes. I said, and I can't remember, but I remember that was not an issue. Science was taught as science. Interestingly enough, this is all only boiled up. We had a lot of veterans on the campus from Korea and still from World War II. When we had the veterans had married veterans housing. There was a large section fairly close to the campus where we had that. So there was a little more. I think that gave a mature element to the campus. Not that we were a dull life and et cetera, because some of the veterans are the biggest partiers of all. We also we were still greatly influenced by Dr. Bennett. Dr. Bennett's influence cannot be overlooked because we had when I was going to school there in '57, he was no longer the president, but Harry Truman came down. Then former President Truman came down out of respect to Dr. Bennett, who had died 4 or 5 years ago, to visit the campus and tour some facilities there. We had Haile Selassie, the head of president of. He may be the prime minister then of Ethiopia, visited the campus before I was there. So we had a constant flow of dignitaries in there out of respect for many of the programs that Dr. Bennett started and were still going. Back to the Johnny Bright story, and I'll give you an example. See, most people don't realize, but OSU continued up until the 70s to staff and administrate land-grant college in Ethiopia. And that influence was on campus. And so we had Ethiopians, exchange students. We had a lot of exchange students in Stillwater when I was going to school there, from Ethiopia, from Venezuela. We had geological students from Venezuela. We had people from Pakistan, Iraq, a number of Iraqis. By the way, they had a interesting program. They OSU and Northeastern Oklahoma A&M Junior College had a program where the students from Iraq and Iran would come to Miami, Oklahoma and go to the junior college their first year in the U.S. to get acclimatized, learn the language. So they would go to the junior college 1 year and then they would transfer and go down to, I used the word transfer, they would go to Stillwater. And so I knew a number of the people from Iraq. There was some, and these were usually older, in their late 20s or early 30s, people from Iraq. And a lot of them were married and they had their wives with them and so forth. So we had a lot of this early international activities going on a campus. So, and it all came radiated out from what Dr. Bennett had started. It was very interesting going to school there then because of this flavor. As a matter of fact, a fellow that I roomed with in geological camp was from Venezuela. I made a couple of notes here on, we didn't have the corporate sponsorships. You know, it was not commercialized. You know, people gave gifts, companies, etc. They just gave it. They wasn't expected to put a dang banner up saying, you know, here's so-and-so. They just gave it. It's interesting how that's changed. The draft was still in place. Now, on all male students that had not been in the service, this was a big unknown for us because we had deferments to finish college. And as soon as you finished college, you were either going to go get drafted in the Army or you could voluntarily enlist in the Air Force or Marines or Navy. So that was a big question mark on all young men's future as what am I going to do when I get out of school. That impacted us a lot more than people would realize. A lot of guys obviously went to ROTC. We had a large ROTC elements there, Army and Air Force, and a lot of guys went ahead and got their commissions and went in that way. I ended up going into the Air Force after I graduated. So that's a component that it's underestimated as to how much that influenced or what that meant to us. We were in the Cold War. We were subject to draft. And so that was, that put a certain amount of seriousness on it. Also, if you flunked out, you went right into the Army. So that helped. Oh, I made a note here. Oh, I'm back to commercialism. The only thing I can remember, and of course I don't remember all of them, but I do remember the tobacco companies, the cigarettes companies coming around, and they would give out free samples. And they had these little mini packs, packages of cigarettes. And they weren't there all the time, but I remember they would, they were around giving those out. Has anyone told you about the big dust storm in 1955?
In Stillwater?
Yes.
No.
Oh, I'm making history here for you. In April of 1955, I looked this up on the internet, by the way, and it's there for, but I knew my memory was good. I went and started looking for it. It didn't take long to find out. But the last big dust storm in the Southwest, and this was Oklahoma, Texas, and part of Kansas, was in April of 1955. We had a severe drought for 2 or 3 years, similar to what we've been occurring here. And we had a dust storm, and it hit Stillwater. and it was frightening because we're talking 30, 40 mile an hour winds, and this is all record. And I was living off campus, and at noon, it was so dark you could not see across the street. And at noon, they turned on all the street lights. The dust was that thick. And it lasted for a couple of days. But it's of record that the last major dust storm in Oklahoma was in April of 1955, and it hit Stillwater, and it hit it hard. I mean, it was amazing. We were just going, what is this stuff?
Did you have to attend classes while it was going on?
Sure.
In the dust? Sure.
I mean, you could walk, and you got grimy, but we went on to classes. They didn't shut the school down. So that was a piece of history and you can look at it, as I said, look it up on the internet. Wardrobes. Obviously, I think the standard wardrobe for a lot of us non-fraternities was like 1 or 2 pair of jeans and a pair of khakis and T-shirts and 3 or 4 white T-shirts. The T-shirts with all the logos and everything, those hadn't come out yet. But shirts and a few shirts, you could always put your entire wardrobe in one big suitcase for the year, literally. And walk, oh my gosh. I lived off campus my first 2 years, and there were, as I said, there were so many of us doing that. Many. We had no air conditioning. And heating wasn't really sometimes the greatest, okay? And we would get, well, there was 3 of us in a room same size as this. And we cooked ourselves, okay? And this was very common because it was called, living off campus and batching, because you could live cheaper than you could living in a dorm and paying for your dorm meals. And the first year where I lived was about 4 or 5 blocks from the edge of the campus. And you can imagine, we walked and we walked and we walked and we walked. The second year I was a little bit closer, but that was an interesting thing. There were no drugs. Drugs hadn't hit this country. There were a few. I went home and there was one guy that we all knew he was doing amphetamines, but the drug problem had not hit. Don't get me wrong, there were guys who were obviously headed, and girls, headed towards alcoholism, but that was not a component on campus at that time at all. No drug problems. So we didn't have a major law problem on campus. I never heard of any students being killed or major violent crimes and etc. That was not a crime because it was a little more quieter times in a sense. There had been student walkouts. You probably have heard those. And then the year before I went there, they had the infamous student male panty raids. Have you heard of those?
I haven't said that yet either.
No. It was in the early, it was in, I'm going to say 52, 53, 54, somewhere in there. Before I was there, it didn't happen but after they had the walkouts if they'd win a big football game, okay? And then they said, no, we don't want you to do that. And then in the springtime, the foliage came out and Theta Pond was more attractive and et cetera as a place to hang out. And I don't know, and it started across the United States. It wasn't just something that happened at Stillwater. But all of a sudden in the springtime, we had these panty raids. A bunch of guys would go storm into the girls' dorms. and the game was you had to get 1 or 2 pair of panties. So they'd run in the room, grab some panties and run outside. And it was a college prank. And it was done all over the United States. But we had the panty raids at Stillwater for a short period of time. Well, the administration took a dim view of that and the walkout, so I don't know why, but so when I got there, it was pretty quiet. You couldn't, the word was out, and you want to stay here, you better behave. I shouldn't. I'll go ahead and say this. That obviously, you know that a lot of people drop out of school, and I was determined not to drop out, and so I really, the library and the student union. There were a couple of lounges up there on the second floor. I literally lived in those places studying. I mean, I just spent so much time. The college of choice for people that couldn't make it at Stillwater was to go to Tahlequah. And when I was there, that was it. Okay, if you can't make it here, go over to Tahlequah. Be what it may. Let me go back a little bit more on the Ethiopia OSU contact, because that had a lot of influence on my life, and it still does. It was something that we were very proud of, and here we were getting these multicultural, multinational exposures in the heartland, and I know I've made friends with a number of the professors who taught over there, and it was a major accomplishment, and I think that it's a shame that Oklahoma did not build on it that much more. I later on, after time in the military, spent 2 years working in Yemen, and I'm also an expert on Somalia. I have been advisor to the U.S. State Department on Somalia. What helped me so much was when I was in Yemen, I'd go over to Ethiopia, and it was just amazing. The Ethiopians would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Oklahoma." And they just made me at home. Oh, from Stillwater, or we know Oklahoma A&M, because the reputation of Oklahoma A&M, OSU, in Ethiopia in the 60s and the 70s, and they shut that school down, I think, in the early 80s, was amazing. So we have a lot to be proud of about our accomplishments. And we had it was Addis Ababa, Ethiopia is the name of the place where they had the school, and it was very, very impactful on that culture. And several, there's a doctor named Yilla Tillahum, who is the foremost veterinary medicine researcher in the world. And he's a graduate of OSU, and he came out of Ethiopia. He was a barefoot boy in a primitive village, and he wandered into that school, and his instructors recognized this kid is brilliant. And the rest is history. And he's still teaching at the University of California in Davis, California. You got any questions? I've been talking a lot here.
You're on a roll.
Let me look at my notes, see what I left out.
How about homecoming?
College homecoming was not that the football games were not that impactful. I didn't go to very many college. I only went about 3 or 4 games while I was there. The homecomings were nice, but they were not that big of an event you had to do, or that much celebration, other than the alumni being greeted at a football game or introduced, and some alumni receptions. It was not that impactful on me. Okay. Incidentally, from the Johnny Bright incident, and then I had played football 1 year at junior college in Miami. But I realized later on in life how much that impacted me, because this man was targeted because he was black, and he was hurt, as his jaw broke. And it was just so, I mean, later on in life, I realized that what an injustice that was. So back to the Johnny Bright story. Go ahead. You had another question?
With homecoming, didn't they decorate the houses and have a parade, that sort of thing, too? Or
I really don't remember because, again, I had a learning disability and I had to study. I mean, I was just, I really, really had to study. And so some of the festivities I did not participate in. I think there was a parade of such. And usually the fraternities and sororities and some of those, homecoming was a bigger event for them, but for their alumni also. Incidentally, there was not any major rift between the fraternities and sororities and us independents. I mean, we were all going to school. I was always amazed, though, that I'd be in classes and the fraternities, some of the fraternity guys, how do they make such good grades on these tests? Well, I learned that, they would all have a large collection of the tests. And so they had an advantage, seemingly. Later on, I realized, no, they don't know how to, we had to just dig it out. But anyway, there wasn't. I had friends from high school in several of the fraternities, and a lady that I dated was over at one of the sororities, so there wasn't any major difference.
Any tale about the library?
Somebody was always pouring a bottle of detergent in the fountain. They still do that.
Good coloring sometimes.
It was a new library then. It was open to like 55 somewhere. Other than literally being in there up on, I think the second or third floor was where I was at, and it was like a treasure. Here's all these books, here's all these magazines, and I just spent, I was up there, I had a couple of corners where I would stay, and I would stay with some other people and study in the stairwell too. There wasn't any smoking in the library, but you could get in the stairwell and smoke, okay? So there was smoking in the stairwells, okay? And there were a few couples being very friendly in the stairwells occasionally. Other than that, it was just a place where, that and then the student union were really spent a lot of time. Those are my best library stories for the thousands of hours I spent in it, and they closed it at 10:30, I believe. 10:30 or 11. What time do they close it now?
It's early. I mean, like 2 o'clock in the morning, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I think at 11 o'clock they'd shut the doors because I was...
During finals week, they stayed open 24 hours.
Wow. We were...
And there's food in the library now. You said you lived off campus. Do you remember which direction? What street?
Well, Water Street. There's a Water Street.
I've only lived in Stillwater a year.
I lived north about 4 blocks towards town. There's a main artery runs east and west of town, and I lived right next to it. And then one year, and then another year I lived, I think it was over on Water Street, and it was 2 or 3 blocks from campus.
Well, a lot of the north housing units are being taken down for the athletic village, so we may have been over that.
Wait a minute, I said north, I meant south towards town. Again, There was a shortage of dorm space. One thing we had, there wasn't, so that and the price and so forth, a lot of us just chose to live off campus.
And you cooked?
Yes. We walked to the Safeway and would get each one of us would get 2 big bags of groceries, and that would last us for about a week, okay? And typical bologna lunch meat, sandwiches, soup, weenies. My gosh, still can't eat weenies. One time we went broke, and we literally tried to make weenie water soup. It didn't work. Well, we tried it. We went flat broke and didn't have anything, you know, so we tried weenie water soup.
You couldn't phone home for money, did you?
Well, that's an interesting point. Phones, okay? No one had phones in where you were living. It just wasn't done. We didn't have the money for it. So, and you didn't have cell phones, obviously. And if you wanted to contact everybody, you wrote home, okay? You needed money, you wrote home, etc. But you did not have phones. And on the dorms, they usually had one, if I recall, they had one phone for an entire floor. Somebody would want to talk to somebody. Maybe it was one phone on each end of the floor. I think that was it. And so the phone, and they were not pay phones, they were just regular phones. And so somebody would call and ask to speak to so-and-so. The guys in the rooms nearest the phone would go answer the phone, go down the hall and get someone. And it was not that often. It just wasn't that, you know, wasn't done. So there wasn't the hours on the phone like there are today. You didn't have the communications home, and we never thought about it, you know. But we lived and cooked, and most of us lost weight because of walking and doing our own cooking. And we would go eat in the cafeteria at the student union occasionally, or occasionally we would get invited to figure out. You could buy a meal ticket at one of the I can't think of that Willard Hall. Is it still there?
Willard's still there.
And it was girls' dorm then. And you could buy a meal ticket there, even though you didn't live on campus. I mean, so we would go in there. But no, that was kind of interesting, to say the least, you know. But you know, that was it. I mean, everyone was in the same boat. So that's how we.
Can you describe a typical date?
Pardon?
A typical date.
Well, first of all, you had to borrow somebody's car. Okay, well, not always, but that was really, if you could do that, and then you would either go to the movies, or there were some sororities, not sorority houses, not the Greek sororities, and they would have dances. So to go to one of those functions. I was in a geological society and we had dances. So get a car, hopefully, or if there was some event, we were very fortunate because the school really brought in a lot of outstanding entertainers for that day and age. Ella Fitzgerald was there. Count Basie, Gene Krupa, the famous drummer, Buddy Rich, drummer. They had a battle of the bands. There were a couple of jazz combos that came in, a number of events like that. So a typical date would be, okay, you go to Willard Hall and go to that event, and then you'd have to walk back fairly fast because they closed those doors at the girls' dorms. That was it. And the girl that had to ring and get back in, she got written up. And that was a big no-no. And I think there was 2 or 3 2 or 3 written ups and they were out of the dorm or something. It was very, very strict. And it was like during the week, it seemed like to me it was like 9:30 or 10. It was amazing that they had to be in. The doors were closed. So the typical date was you go get them. We would go to the event and then hurry back, and there would be a bunch of us with our dates standing outside of Willard saying goodbye, bright lights and even kissing was frowned upon, so.
And the men didn't have to be back at a particular time?
No, there was, no, the men's dorm did not have, well, wait a minute, I think they did have a 12 o'clock or something like that, but got to realize there's still a lot of veterans on there, so wasn't the sexist prejudice, but it was a fact of life that we had a lot of veterans and older men students that, wait a minute, I just came out of war, I'm not going to put up with this, so that would be a typical one. Coke dates to the student union or one of the off-campus drugstores, that sort of thing. But you had to borrow somebody's car. And we went to Lake Blackwell a few times, had some, I'm going to say that word, we had some weenie roast.
Do you remember about how much tuition was?
Seemed like it was, what, $25, $30 a semester?
I don't know.
Yeah, it was somewhere in that range because it was only like $2 or $3 an hour. It was $30 or something like that, and it was in today comparative. It was very, very low.
You had to pay to earn your ways to do that, or did parents help?
Parents helped, but again, my mother was a school teacher, and my father, and she had a college degree, obviously, and my father worked for a telephone company. We had money, per se. They paid for 60-70% of my expenses, and but it was so necessary, and it was that you had to get a good job in the summertime. Consequently, to help, okay. Consequently, and again, the economy was not that good. We had a recession in Oklahoma in 55, 56, 57. The oil industry really went down. So we had a recession. And, and the drought had hit western Oklahoma. So there wasn't the large amounts of money. There was no grants or aids at all, period. GI Bill, those guys could barely, that GI Bill would cover maybe 70%. So they had to work. So we had to work, a lot of us. So there wasn't that many good jobs here in Oklahoma in the summertime, because it was just, here's this huge workforce turned loose, college students. So a lot of us, I went to Idaho. I worked in the National Forest as a firefighter one summer. I went to Alaska one summer and worked in gold mines, gold fields. There was, a matter of fact, I got a ride with a couple from Stillwater, and we drove all the way up to Fairbanks, and I worked there all summer and made really good money. So there were things like that there was more pressure on us to make money. There are students now I know that have the same problems with these high prices, but again, there was a mass exodus out of the state. A lot of guys would go get on work the wheat harvest. That was a very common thing to do, work in the wheat harvest. Try to get jobs. We were in the oil field, so just wherever, if you could pick one up in your hometown. But again, there weren't that wasn't that good of a economy in the state, so we had to figure out ways to do it. Of course, I augmented my income my senior year.
Did you have to hide it in your dorm, or did
You just, it was.
No, I mean, I think we had a closet, so I just put it in a closet, and that was it. It wasn't, no, the proctor knew what, I told the proctor what I was going to do, and you know, if I remember he basically, you know.
What kind of profit were you making on this?
Oh, I was buying a lot of Jim Beam, and I think I was paying, and again, I think I was paying $3 a bottle. They're $2.50, $3 a bottle, and I was selling it for $5. So I was doubling my money, okay? And then I would set a bottle aside in case somebody got sick. But basically, it was you know, I made a few dollars off of it.
Well, you had to save enough of that to buy the next.
Yeah, I had the inventory, pay for my own inventory,
So learning skills.
Yeah, I was learning entrepreneurism. I think I learned entrepreneurism, the Johnny Bryce situation, and was very impactful, even though it happened when I was still in high school. I was just visiting there, but the international experience, exposure was so good. And we had a great geology department. And it was fairly new. It had only been going for about 4 or 5 years when I got there. So I was very proud of that and still am. And the wrestling and basketball were more favored sports in a sense than football. We had the championship wrestling teams and basketball teams, the Iowa days. He was such a class act, and that's why the contradiction between the Johnny Bright incident and then what was happening over in the basketball, it sent the wrong signals about what was happening there at the campus.
If you were to give advice to students today, what would you tell them? In particular?
Well, obviously, study, and you may not get another chance. And there's a lot more lessons than just what's in the books, and so forth. You'll learn, for instance, I learned, and anybody who is going to school will learn that it's such great confidence builder. So look beyond just the testing and so forth and try to weigh your personal growth from semester to semester. And usually that's hard to do. And but I think if I would encourage people to be reflective on what's happening to them, on their own maturity, their own growth, whether it's mental, spiritual, or their morals, how that's changing. If they could, they might keep a diary, which most people don't do, but keeping a personal diary of things that are impactful on them. If they're closet poets, write your poetry, okay? Those are ways to keep track of what's happening to you. You don't have to show it to anybody, but personal records, diaries, etc., are not, to my knowledge, are not encouraged enough. And do it yourself. Only you know what's happening to you. Really.
Any favorite professors that still come to mind?
Oh yeah, John Naff, the man that got me into geology, was maybe you heard of his name before, but he was our guru of the geology department. It wasn't even a doctor. It was John Naff, and he was so brilliant, so personable, and so impressive, and yet he spent time with each individual student in a sense, or he made you feel that way. So Dr. John Naff, I had a lady professor, and I can't even think of her name.
Too many of those in the 50s.
Oh, there was Smith, Dr. Smith. She taught physics. So I was so surprised. I took physics and I liked it and I passed it. And so Naff and Smith and I'm trying to think. Those are the two primary ones that really had an impact. We had some sizable classes, and those two would be the ones. A subject that just blew me away was I hated it. We had to take humanities. I just went barf. All this Plato and Greek mythology and stuff. I would cringe. What? This is worthless. Well, guess who's reading Greek mythology and really loves the stuff now? Me. The literature that we were exposed to, and I guess maybe that's a backward thing to say to students is just because you hate something or don't like it now doesn't mean that in the future that seed won't grow and you will really, really enjoy it or get a lot of out of that particular thing. But I had to think, what did I have? 6 hours, 8 hours of humanities. I remember I was just going, oh, this is terrible. Reading all those books. And but it was God seeing. I didn't know it.
Anything else you come to mind that you wanted to share?
Oh, let me look at my notes, see if I left anything out. I've covered a lot here.
Do you go back to campus very often?
Not that often, although I do visit with a professor over there who was not a professor when I was there, who's retired, Dr. Conrad Evans with the International. He was head of the OSU campus in Ethiopia. So he and I stay in contact. We still have some things going on over there. Just a couple of, I noticed, I think I mentioned that there was not this enormous, I call it tribalism of OU versus OSU, or all the bumper stickers and the T-shirts and everything with A&M and et cetera. By the way, there's kind of a subtle point here that back then, I know one great story. I almost left this out. Okay, I'll tell you my famous Pistol Pete story. When it's about probably 1957, my junior year, and he was around campus, and he was the model for Pistol Pete. His name was Frank Eaton. He was genuine retired U.S. Marshal. And he had long, droopy mustaches, and he was in his late 80s, and he still was an official U.S. Marshal. And he wore his badge, and he wore his 6-gun on campus. I mean, he was an elderly gentleman. He was very erect. He was impressive, okay? And who's going to tell him, take your badge off, put your gun up? Nobody did, okay? And he still was pretty bright. So he would come to the lower level of the student union. There was a room down there, and he would tell some of his stories. And the room was 2 or 3, it was fairly sizable. And he was down there telling his stories, and a girl asked him to demonstrate his quick draw, okay? So he said, sure. So he pulled the dang gun out and blew a hole. The gun went off, and he blew a hole in the wall. He carried that thing with live ammunition in it all the time. But and the people in that room just went, they all just froze because he said, sure, and he pulled it out, and it was an accident. He didn't mean to, but he pulled it out, and luckily he was pointing in the wall, and it was a big old 45, and it blew a big hole in that wall, and it was old black powder, and smoke just gushed out of that. And that sound just reverberated. I wasn't in the room, but a number of people I knew told me about it, and they said, "Oh, you should have seen that." So that's my Pistol Pete story, real story about what really happened. A point I was going to make, and too, I was going to talk about cowboys a little bit, was back then, there wasn't this, let me say, pseudo cowboyism that we have now, because at that time it was A&M, agriculture and mechanics, and you still have enormous agriculture. But we had so many genuine cowboys that nobody had to, they didn't act like cowboys because they were. It's a subtle difference. And so we didn't see this rah-rah cowboys. I mean, we did, but it was in a little bit more subdued way, because there was plenty of genuine, big-time cowboys on that campus. And they were always the nicest, most courteous students of all. There was none of the cowboy swag or anything like. I'm not implying that it's that way now, but it's a subtle difference that I noticed. Is it, we are, so why do we have to strut it, sort of thing. Interesting deal. Other than that, I have enjoyed my time talking to you all about my days at Stillwater. I was so lucky to be able to go to school there and get all the exposures. The veterinary school, its reputation is worldwide. Most people don't realize that. You have some people over there that are known worldwide, so I was very lucky, and I think I've about run out of stories, unless you have some questions to ask.
You said your brother went to OSU. Did anyone else in your family? Was anybody else?
My mother went one summer. She did some graduate work over there. My brother went there. I had two uncles that went there in the late 30s, and both graduated. Both then went into World War II. And so we would go over there occasionally while they were going to school. I remember that as a little kid, going there.
That's when the library was the real pretty one with carrots.
Yes, that's right. I forgot all about it. And yeah, that's right, because they went to school there like 38 through 41, or 37 through 1937 through 1941. So I had two uncles. One of them was killed in World War II, as I said. The other one passed away here recently. So it's been in the family a long time, and I remember going to Stillwater even as a little kid to visit my uncles. I had another relative who went to school there. He was a second cousin, I think, and he went there after World War II as a student, and he had married a German war bride. And they went to school, lived there in Stillwater. So I remember going over and meeting her. So yeah, the university, the school has been in the family for a long time. We've been in it, and et cetera. It's all been very positive. I have no bad recollections or incidences at all so far.
Do you remember your room number when you lived in North Murray? Just out of curiosity.
No. Second floor. No, I don't, because I was only there 1 year, and I don't remember that. Did you want one of my? Did you want to buy some whiskey?
No, they're getting ready to renovate. My husband teaches geography. He's going to be on the third floor. He's going to have an office space on the third floor. So I'm just curious. I'll tell him to go look in the second floor.
Second floor on the north end, on North Murray, and it would be the room in the far northeast corner. And that was it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Very enjoyable.
Period when I was going to school there, the standard bedding was Army blankets. And the reason was we were still awash with Army surplus material from World War II in Korea. And you could buy good Army blankets, wool blankets, for like $2 for $1.50 or something like that. So I know I had them, my roommate had them, and it was out of necessity, and it's so practical. And some guys, there were some farm boys and some people there that just really had minimal money. So I remember guys coming to school there with 3 blankets, no sheets, okay? No bed mattress covers in the dorms. That was the bedding. That was standard bedding of a lot. Now there were a lot that did not, Sears and Roebuck, as we called it then, or J.C. Penney's, but that was a little facet that might give you an insight to the standard of living. But it was no big deal. I mean, that's what that was our part of our way of life back then. Period.